Hi, I'm Jim Benson, author of the new book, The Collaboration Equation, and co-founder of Modus Institute. We have a treat here for the launch of the Collaboration Equation book, and that's a series of conversations with me, J.B. Rainsberger, and Jurgen Appelo. Two people that I really respect and enjoy the company of and haven't gotten to see nearly enough of over the course of COVID. And we're going to have 5 conversations in 5 consecutive episodes. And this is the first. It is called The Philosophy of Good Conversation. It's on that. So, Jurgen, do you have a philosophy of good conversation?
Oh yeah, I came up with one while running recently, and so if I may, I will briefly try to explain. I call it the cauliflower philosophy. Imagine there's a cauliflower on the table, and there is a chef and a mathematician and a child looking at it. And they each have a different interpretation of what it is. The chef says you can eat it and lots of good recipes. The mathematician says it's a fantastic example of a fractal object. And the child says it's a funny football. Now, I thought I have a couple of principles that I came up with while running. Very useful to do this while you're running, in my opinion. The first is that they're all wrong. Like all models are wrong, some are useful. The first part of the famous George Box principle. So that's the first thing. Everyone is wrong. That's the human condition. We do not know reality as it is. That's impossible for us. And that's what scientists and philosophers seem to agree on. So that's a no-brainer. We all have approximations of reality. Then the second principle would be some are less wrong than others. The chef is less wrong about the cauliflower than the child. And another example, Einsteinian physics is less wrong than Newtonian physics. It's more accurate, but still wrong because it doesn't connect to quantum physics, etc. So that's the second principle. And then the third one is, depending on context, some models are more useful than others. So the child's perspective could sometimes actually be more useful than the chef's perspective. Sometimes it is a nice football, the cauliflower, perhaps not for a long time to treat it like that. But yeah, that depends on the context. And then the last principle, and that's the most important one, there's no correlation between accurate and useful. What is useful to some is not accurate and vice versa. And I think that is what a lot of conversations are about. For some, something is more accurate, but for others, a less accurate representation is actually more useful. And I had just a discussion like that just today, a few hours ago, about scaling versus descaling of organizations. And I think I am right when I say descaling is nonsense and you're using scaling and descaling in an incorrect way from a scientific perspective, that then I would be more, well, quite accurate, more accurate than people who talk about descaling organizations. But I'm talking about accuracy of my viewpoint. Well, for them, that's not relevant. They have a different intention, which is the usefulness of what they mean, the scaling and descaling, and that is for them fine. It's not about being as accurate as possible. And I think that, so that's my philosophy, that a lot of our conversations are like that we're just, one is talking about the accuracy. I am more right than you are, or less wrong, while others are like, okay, well, I don't care because this is actually more useful for me in my context to see it like this.
Yeah.
And I am becoming more aware of this. So that's sort of my philosophy, that I am talking about accuracy and not about usefulness. And sometimes the opposite, because it depends on context. Then I think, well, actually, my interpretation is well, very wrong, but it is more useful for me right now. And yeah, that's
there's a whole bunch of things. Like I've got a list now of a whole bunch of things that of woo, because this, one of the first things that popped into my head was the is part of all of that stuff, right? As soon as you start using, so I read about E prime like 20 years ago and started trying to write that way. That's where you write in English without using the verb to be. And part of the idea involves focusing more on your interpretations and how you're thinking about the situation rather than trying to label things. And one of the original goals that I had in mind related to judging people less harshly. If I labeled them less often, I would judge them less harshly, and I would generally be a better human being. And you can see how hard it is to talk without using to be. We're just so accustomed to using it that it really pervades the language. But as soon as you say it is a funny looking football, or it is an example of a fractal or whatever, you're limiting the context. And one of the problems with limiting the context is that it almost always triggers other people to argue about the context with you.
Right.
And, if I've read recently about the differences between divergent and convergent thinking. That's, I guess, those are phrases people are using. And when we prefer to do both, and when we find both useful. Right? Divergent thinking tends to help us generate options. Convergent thinking tends to help us make decisions and move forward, because at some point you want to probably make a decision out of all those options. Yeah. And I suspect that people don't really notice that when they when they label things, they're limiting the context. They're trying to converge, whether they want to or not. And I can imagine this being specifically or particularly frustrating in a working environment where our goal is actually, what would be helpful now would be to generate options. And yet everybody's using this labeling language that's limiting the context, that's turning the argument to, no, it isn't, instead of, how might you be right?
Yeah.
Because I know, Jurgen, every time you post one of those things, my first reaction is, I'm going to reply with 3 different contexts in which he's wrong, just to bug him.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we say it is, but what we mean is, it seems to me as.
Yes, that's one of the tricks, right? In E prime, you say it seems to me, or I consider, or I believe, or I interpret, any of those.
That is what we can also mean, but language makes it so easy to say it is.
Yes, exactly.
And of course triggers other people say, no, it isn't.
Right. And you and I can have fun with that because we trust each other. But in a work environment, I often don't trust the people enough to be able to do that freely. And so if it tumbles out of my mouth, it can create a problem. And I see it happen so often in meetings, in working sessions, during ensemble programming, any of that kind of stuff, where the argument just goes way off track because there happen to be 2 very passionate people who are very intent on labeling things the way they think they are.
Exactly. And if you do not even have the intention of agreeing with someone or trusting them, then it's very easy to start a discussion about whether something is an accurate representation of it or a useful representation of it, which is not the same thing. You can always disagree.
So here's a catchphrase I like to use in those situations, right? When I see people arguing like that, I'll just look at the one of them who I think trusts me the most, and I'll just ask them directly, look, do you want to be right, or do you want to solve the problem? Which is very much your accuracy versus usefulness distinction, right? Like, what are you trying to do right now?
Yeah.
You just want to be right, or do you actually want to move forward in this conversation and move towards a resolution or a solution or something?
Right. Well, we both trust Jim, so now we want to know his his reflection on it.
Oh, I'm just sitting here judging you both.
I felt it.
You felt it. So what I love about this is that when you get together with a group of people and you allow everything to be verbal, then the loudest voices prevail because the playing field is verbal.
Yeah.
And the 3 of us will always be major combatants on that battlefield because we're pretty comfortable being verbal. And being polite when necessary and challenging when necessary, which is why we do things like affinity mapping or other things that take the this is statements from people, put them on Post-it notes, put them on the wall, and make them into things where they're externalized from the person and then no longer, I shouldn't say no longer, but are less likely to be identified with. So that when they see that there's 15 different constellations of options up there and theirs is part of a larger constellation, it's no longer the thing they are fighting for. It is an option and it's a thing. And there are other good things up there as well that have been laid kind of on the same kind of objective plane, not to get like overly philosophical about it, but every one of those people that come to the meeting come with their own worldview, the experiences that have happened to them throughout their lives. And so they will be the child or the cook or the, whatever, mathematician. And they could shift in those roles on different days. Yep. So their perspective even changes. So what people don't get is that what they're saying right now that they're building ownership around may not be something that they really believe. It's just something that is useful today that now they're locking themselves into believing. And so for me, good conversation, if it's with a bunch of different people, especially in a professional situation, needs some sort of visual or shared playing field, some sort of game to mitigate those natural human psychological responses.
Yeah, I really like it was a completely different perspective than I have on this, because I tend to come at this completely from the understanding what's going on in my own mind and trying to change my own behavior and then model that behavior for other people. And it's one of the reasons I find the satir interaction model, or the ingredients of an interaction, so helpful. It's similar to the E prime thing. It reminds me to focus on my understanding and my interpretation of what's going on. And it helps me it continues to, but it really helped me it helped that illusion of objectivity drop away. It helped me really come to terms with the fact that I am seeing things a certain way. As you say, much like putting things and making them objects on a wall that I can point to, it helps me focus on and be more aware of the fact that I am understanding things a certain way. I'm making assumptions about the world. I'm making assumptions about other people, and I'm interpreting what's going on in a particular way. And if I'm doing that, other people must be doing that. And so in the beginning, where it helped me was to get rid of that thing that we do where we assume that our behavior is rational and everybody else's is irrational, that ours is based on solid understanding and theirs isn't. But in the end, it helped me really start to connect with trying to understand more. Jim, when you say that weird thing, what could you possibly mean? Like, how could I understand or interpret that in a way that I would even agree with? And if I can start doing that in work settings, maybe what I can do is at least influence other people to think similarly, to behave similarly. And in some cases, actually teach them how to do it. And then that becomes a nice way to teach them the model, give them, infect them with this awareness that I was infected with. And maybe that helps make these situations work slightly better.
Could that help Jurgen control the minds of baristas?
That would be nice. But maybe, well, actually, Jim, I like your suggestion or your comment that visualizing helps us increase understanding of what is accurate versus what is useful. By externalizing our models and visualizing things, we sort of distance ourselves from what was in our head versus what is on the wall. And indeed, it's easier to see, well, this is more accurate, but this is more useful, and then get consensus on that. And that would also help me indeed with the latte macchiato versus the cafe latte if I had a conversation with a barista, because you can argue endlessly. But if I could just show 2 pictures, then...
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to be right, or do you want to solve the problem? Do you want the right coffee, or do you want to argue with the Austrians about what a cappuccino is?
Exactly. I want this one. I don't care what you call it.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, fine. You call it a melange. I can live with it.
Whatever.
So this is one of the things that's been the most interesting for me to watch when, especially in working in construction over the last several years, is that we will bring together all of these different contractors that are working on a large scale project, and then we will get them to basically build an annotated value stream or backward plan for the next 6 weeks to figure out all of the logistics, all of the safety,
Right.
everything that goes into that. But these are groups of people who usually don't talk much with each other and really don't like the general contractor. So they come in with an incredible amount of distrust.
Yes.
And then the conversations start in distrust. And then the moment that they become visual, they migrate themselves into patterns of trust. And that always amazes me. All right.
It's funny because I sometimes see the opposite happen. I'm not in the same context, but the mere attempt to make that stuff visible is itself communicating some kind of intent that makes other people kind of nervous and wonder why all of a sudden we need to talk about these things. And it doesn't always go well. I think I can probably count about as many of those going well as many not going well.
Oh, interesting. Because what normally happens is they come in and they're like, how are you trying to screw me today?
Right.
And then they'll initially start putting their tickets up in a way that says, you're going to screw me, so I'm going to try and put these tickets up in some strategic way. But invariably, they'll hit a bottleneck or a dangerous constraint or something where people have to use the same lift or the same loading dock or something. And then we'll just negotiate that out. And then they're like, oh,
right,
wait, you're trying to actually help me. So the tack that I take when people are falling into that situation is, where is a shared constraint?
Yes, make it us against the lift instead of us against each other.
100%, 100%. So this was a great conversation. So thanks guys. And I certainly know who you are, but do you want to do a quick kind of post introduction of yourself and then tell people how they can get a hold of you or ways that you would like them to learn more about you? And we'll start with Jurgen.
Hello there. My name is Jurgen Appelo. I'm in the Netherlands, Rotterdam, awesome city. And I am the author of Management 3.0 and Managing for Happiness. And if you will want to learn more about me, I have a website, jurgenappelo.com.
All right. And JB.
Hi, I'm J.B. Rainsberger. Some people call me Joe, and some people just know me as J Brains. I am... well, let's just say I started life as a programmer and I can still write code, but I'm much more interested in helping programmers figure out how to work with less stress. So whether it has to do with technical skills, people skills, planning skills, whatever it takes, whatever the sources of your stress are, I want to try to help you with that. My inbox is always open. You can always go to ask.jbrains.ca. That's .ca for Canada, also an awesome country. As long as you're willing to wait forever for the answer, that service is free. That's part of my commitment to you, is that I will answer you eventually. And if you need answers sooner, we can talk about how much that costs, and it's less expensive than you might think.
All right. And I'm Jim Benson, and I thank both of my guests, whom I love dearly and because of COVID have not been able to see in an incredibly long time. Most recent book on my site is The Collaboration Equation. Look at that little fly out there. Isn't that awesome? And also teach at modusinstitute.com. And thank you both for these conversations. This was a wonderful way to spend some time, and I very much look forward to seeing you both very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jim.
Love the invite. Thanks, Jim.